management authorities in making improvements to local waste management systems. The USDA has also allocated funding through several programs, as we can see listed here on the screen. Next slide. So as previously mentioned, the US EPA recently announced that it will award the state of Hawaii with $3 million to assist in planning innovative strategies to climate pollution and build clean energy economies across the state. Additionally, Hawaii Administrative Rules 11-58.1-65 requires solid waste disposal facilities to develop a plan to ban source-separated green waste from entering the disposal facility. These plans must meet a 75% diversion rate for all commercially generated green waste and 50% for residential. The Hawaii Green Businesses Program is a free state program that assists and recognizes businesses such as restaurants, hotels, offices, and retail spaces, as well as food service facilities, and green events that aim to operate in an environmentally and socially responsible manner. One of the program's missions is to help businesses reduce waste. In Hawaii County, Hawaii County Code 20-49A2B sets a landfill disposal fee for source-separated green waste and acceptable organics. In the city of Honolulu, approximately 160,000 households can recycle certain organic material into their green carts for biweekly collection by the city and county of Honolulu for transportation to Hawaiian Earth products for composting. City of Honolulu also provides up to $2,000 in program startup reimbursement costs for multi-unit properties looking to establish a recycling program for collection of recyclables, including green waste. In the county of Maui, the Green Grants Program allocates an estimated $100,000 for fiscal year 2024 to support small-scale projects related to sustainability, environmental protection, natural resource protection, conservation, and restoration. The county's Recycling Grants Program allocates $500,000 for fiscal year 2024 to support projects related to landfill diversion, zero waste initiatives, education, equipment upgrades program expansion, materials collection, and the collection and processing of waste resources materials. Now moving on to what other states are doing. Oh, sorry, go back to the last slide. So now on to what other states are doing. In New Hampshire, RSA 149-M21 bans the landfill disposal of green waste at landfills and incinerators. As a result of this regulation, some towns and cities host town-wide pickup events. And effective beginning February 2025, the state has also passed House Bill 300, which bans landfill disposal and incineration of food waste for any person generating 1 or more tons of food waste per week. The bill also allocates $1 million into the state's solid waste management fund, and $500,000 will be used for grants to assist businesses or municipalities who develop infrastructure to keep food waste out of the landfills. In March 2022, New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services also revised its composting regulations to encourage the development of additional composting capacity within the state. These revised rules enable a permit by notification facilities to process all food scraps, including meat and dairy. Prior to these revisions to these rules, composting of meat and dairy required a standard permit, which involved a more complicated permitting process. So the new rules also added 2 key permit exemptions for small-scale food waste drop-off sites and community composting facilities. The food waste drop-off exemption allows collection and storage of up to 1 cubic yard of food waste, allowing food co-ops or other community centers to function as collection points without needing a solid waste facility permit. In the state of Washington, the state passed House Bill 1799 in 2022. This regulation requires state and local governments, businesses, and other organizations to reduce the amount of organic materials being sent to landfills, as well as increase the demand for processed organic materials such as compost. The legislation also calls for an increase in edible food recovery and amends many laws affecting organics management. In California, AB 1826 requires businesses to recycle their organic waste depending on the amount of waste generated per week. The law also requires local jurisdictions across the state to implement an organic waste recycling program to divert organic waste generated by businesses, including multifamily residences that consist of 5 or more units. And as we also discussed already, SB 1383 establishes methane emissions reduction targets in a statewide effort to reduce emissions. And California jurisdictions are also responsible for implementing SB 1383 regulations within their communities, and they must coordinate with city and county planners, waste haulers, waste processing facilities, recyclers, commercial businesses, residents, and edible food recovery organizations. Under SB 1383, jurisdictions are responsible for evaluating jurisdiction readiness and capacity for implementing SB 1383, providing organic waste collection services to all residents and businesses automatically and not relying on a generator subscription, establishing an edible food recovery program, conducting outreach and education to generators, haulers, facilities, and edible food recovery organizations and city county departments, procuring recycled organic waste products such as compost or mulch, as well as renewable natural gases and electricity. And then lastly, jurisdictions are also responsible for inspecting and enforcing SB 1383 compliance and maintaining accurate and timely records. So these next few slides will discuss or introduce education and outreach opportunities to be considered. Next slide. So some of the counties host backyard composting workshops, so the state can further promote these events through communication outlets. The state could also develop additional educational resources and also collaborate with organizations to organize collection events. The City and County of Honolulu website provides several educational resources and links related to food waste prevention. This also includes a cookbook and smart food tips guides, shopping list meal planner, an A through Z storage guide, and a list of mobile apps and web tools. In Maui County, the Maui Uliau Foundation is a nonprofit organization that provides environmental education programs to Maui's youth. One of the programs, the Green Events Program, provides training, pre-event planning services, zero waste stations, and food scraps recycling services for events with as many as 10,000 attendees. And to date, over 29,000 pounds of material have been collected for composting through the Green Events Program. West Maui Green Cycle is a composting operation that has partnered with a handful of local schools to launch composting programs. Through the school food waste composting and reusable programs, West Maui Green Cycle has diverted over 92,000 pounds of food waste. West Maui Green Cycle also aims to launch a weekly curbside pickup program for West Maui residents, which would be used to collect data. And the County of Kauai also offers residents free backyard composting bins. Over the past 2 years, the county has distributed over 8,000 composting bins. Prior to pickup, residents must watch an 8-minute educational video. And the county also offers additional educational resources on home composting as well as food reduction on their website. So as we've already mentioned, Senate Bill 1383 in California also requires jurisdictions to conduct education and outreach on organics recycling to residents, businesses, haulers, solid waste facilities, and local food banks or other recovery organizations. And this outreach needs to be conducted on an annual basis, so it's reoccurring. Education and outreach efforts may include waste characterizations, workshops, regional planning meetings, and the use of print, TV, radio, billboard, and digital and social media. Some jurisdictions have conducted surveys to assess awareness of recycling options and to identify specific barriers to adoption. Several jurisdictions are using community-based social marketing methods to identify specific behaviors to address and specific tools to inspire recycling. Jurisdictions are also conducting route reviews to inspect residential and commercial bins, as you can see in the photo on the bottom right-hand corner. If contamination is present in the bin, a contamination tag is placed on the bin to educate the resident or business on acceptable and non-acceptable materials. When conducting outreach and education, it's also important to have these resources in multiple languages, as you can see on the example on the upper right-hand corner with the signage in 3 different languages. So for free market solutions, I will turn it over to Cesar.
Okay, for free market solutions, in our comparative evaluation, we've identified infrastructure. And infrastructure for managing organics comes in a variety of options. Next slide. So here's a listing of some of those options, including vermicomposting. I'll say we can start also with backyard composting, since it is being identified here. So that's also a free market solution. And so vermicompost is another option of composting. The most traditional type of composting is open windrow composting. Open windrow composting has been primarily being used for composting green waste, as we are adding food waste to the composting process. Aerated static pile composting or in-vessel composting is being implemented, primarily to reduce potential odor emissions. With this in mind, we have also seen fully enclosed composting facilities, which would employ some of the previous methods within a building that has a possibility of controlling air circulation and also inclusive of a biofilter. The last one in our list is an anaerobic digester. Anaerobic digesters produce or are able to process green waste and food waste, able to capture the methane that is generated and produce energy from it. So those are becoming very typical, the development of anaerobic digesters. In California, anaerobic digesters have a pretty well-established permitting pathway, being that California Code Regulations 14 CCR was revised to include anaerobic digestion as a separate permitting tier. Anaerobic digestion also is being supported by a supplemental EIR, which basically is your first step in your environmental review for such a project development. So the development of anaerobic digesters in the state of California and other states is being seen as one of the options in this integrated management of organics. Most states and jurisdictions employ all the above. So with that, we can move to the next slide.
All right, thank you for the presentation on this analysis. We open the floor now in the virtual session to our general public. Public comment on the presentation provided. If you have any thoughts on the materials, particularly if there are other opportunities that you'd like to encourage us to consider, or the task force to consider. General public, please place your hand. Anyone?
Not yet.
No comment? Okay. Yes, Sean.
I'd like to suggest creating some kind of program similar to the High Five for recycling, but around food waste that gives producers of food waste kind of an incentive to compost or properly manage their food waste. For example, at our facility, with all of our members, we weigh every bucket. So we're keeping really good data and we know how much every member is producing. And we'd love, as a permitted facility to at the end of the year, give some sort of slip back to them that says, hey, this year you kept 300 pounds, out of the landfill. And then maybe they're able to turn that in for some sort of redemption or some sort of reward for playing their role in helping to combat climate change.
Thank you, Sean.
We do have a raised hand in the audience.
Okay.
Rafael?
Rafael, please.
Yeah, aloha everybody. Thanks for all these wonderful presentations. I'm really enjoying tuning in. I did have a thought that I know that this is focused a lot on composting, and obviously being in connection with the Investo composting system that we wrote the grant for, I'm all about it. I think that I'm not seeing a whole lot though on what's higher up the scale of like how are we actually doing the work to prevent so much food waste from happening in the first place. And I get pretty sad, disturbed, disgusted when I go into grocery stores here, and at the end of the day there's hundreds of pounds of poke that's being thrown away, and knowing what the costs of that in our oceans are, it feels to me like we're not doing enough to address the really realities of letting capitalism run free, and that businesses should be held far more responsible for producing food waste in general, and how we are building that into legislation to make sure that we're only producing and eating what we need and not in so much excess, and that if we run out of something in a store at the end of a day, that's a good thing, that's not a bad thing, and we need to plan accordingly. So I hope that that's being brought up, that we have to do a lot more work on stopping from
Thank you, Gabriel. Anyone else? See another hand?
No one else?
Just to add on to that, thank you for mentioning that. I will say the Honolulu County website does have quite a bit of resources. I was really impressed on food waste prevention, regarding, how to create a shopping list, how to properly store your food, so that, you can extend the shelf life of these products. So I think it's definitely important to start, discussing these things with meal planning and only buying what you need, and not over purchasing and buying things in bulk just because it's cheaper, especially when it comes to food, if you're not going to finish it all. So I think definitely providing these resources to residents can further enhance outreach and education to reduce food waste.
There has been also lots of discussion regarding best buy or expiration dates. So that's another way of managing food waste prevention. There's legislation in California for sure regarding labeling. So that's also another angle to prevent food waste. So just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to add that it's very important for the grocery stores to partner with the food banks and the food pantries to donate food well before it's expiring, so that they're planning that out. And that's a good option to feed people on the EPA hierarchy. Source reduction and then feeding people would be our top two.
Thanks, Ahmad. We use that as a transition into the second phase, which is really the task force presenting your thoughts and ideas in response to the presentation and sharing your thoughts on the information presented, as well as any opportunities that was just provided for improvements to organics and management in Hawaii. So task force members, I can go down the list or just go ahead and I'll allow you to log on when you're ready. We haven't heard from Robert. Okay. And I think the presentation did touch about Maui. Robert or Craig and Brenda from Hawaii County. Christine, obviously you're with us. Either of you have anything to offer at this time? Okay.
I do, but
No,
I
how about
don't
yourself?
want to get in front of other people.
Oh, no. We're just going through the roster to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to speak. So if you have something to offer, Christine, please do so.
Okay, well, you invited me, I'm going to participate. Here we go. CPRG, the listing that you had about that is actually, you have a misunderstanding of what's happening. That $3 million that the state received was for planning specific to the next phase of the grant. So there's a planning phase for CPRG, there's an implementation phase, and that $3 million is strictly to help the state develop what's called a priority action plan. But interestingly, they staggered the two solicitations and opportunities.
Christine,
so right now,
Christine, sorry not to interrupt you, but you're having some audio issues where some static is interrupting your speech. So I don't know if you maybe could connect or reconnect your audio so we can hear you clearly on your thoughts.
Was that the whole time or?
Yes, kind of for the whole time you're speaking.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe turn off video.
Just ask her to turn off her video.
Yeah, do you mind turning off your video and then continuing?
No. How's that? Is that better?
Yes, it is.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so for the CPRG, what you have up there is incorrect. It's not a general planning process. It is specific to the second phase of CPRG. There's a planning phase and there's an implementation phase. And that $3 million is specifically dedicated to helping the state come up with what's called a priority climate action plan. And that wants to develop that.
Sorry, Christine, we're still getting feedback.
Yeah, we're not able to understand what you're saying due to some pretty intense static. I'm not sure if it's a connectivity issue on your end, but could we perhaps circle back to you as you maybe try to troubleshoot some of that?
Yeah, I think what I'll try to do is call in.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good. Thank you, Christine.
Okay.
And do we have anybody else in the audience, or Ramsey, did you want to call in someone else?
Yeah, Glenn, Dominic, and Ahmad. Ahmad, you already read a comment, but
Andrew has a hand up.
there's someone else with a hand. Andrew?
Hopefully, everyone can still hear me. As far as getting perishable food waste to food banks, I think there's two things that need to be looked at. Number one would be that some of these these companies, even though we have the laws that would not hold them liable, they still, as a company policy, choose not to do that because of liability issues. So I don't know if there's any legal recourse in terms of creating an ordinance where they are required to actually donate that material. So that's one thought. And secondly, I was wondering, the other issue I find with some of the food banks is capacity. They don't have the freezer / or refrigerated space to handle maybe all these perishables that would be coming their way. So trying to get monies available to support infrastructure, not only in storing, but in picking that material up with refrigerated and or freezer trucks. So those are some thoughts I had about how we might be able to address getting these foods to people that are in need.
Thank you, Andrew.
Any other task force members?
I think,
Go ahead, Glenn.
I guess to look at reduction of food waste, that's kind of what we'd like to be able to encourage. In terms of some of the issues surrounding composting of post-consumer food waste with contamination, things like that, if some of those problems could be solved, it could open up availability of that food waste to go to, for example, to pig farmers who might use it for feed. I do know during the pandemic, the pig farmers were not able, because they could only get their feed from pre-consumer sources. A lot of the hotels and things like that were not able to provide because they were closed down feed. And so the pig farmers ended up having to purchase feed from the mainland. And although post-consumer food waste was available, that contamination issue rose its head even for their instance, and so they weren't able to utilize it. So, yeah, that might be something, if you can solve that problem, it could be available for both composters and for animal feed.
Great, thanks, Ed. County of Hawaii, Chris, did you have something to offer? Thank you for joining us, letting us know you're on the call.
Chris made his comment.
Oh, he did? Okay, thank you.
Christine looks like she wants.
Yes.
Yes.
We
Okay,
have
cool.
Christine who is raising her hand. Christine, you're muted.
There we go. How's this? Is
Yes.
it better?
Yes. That's better.
Okay. First, the listing that you have for the climate pollution reduction grant is incorrect. That $3 million that came to the state is not for general planning. It's specific to the second phase of the climate pollution reduction grant opportunity, which is an implementation phase. And they staggered the two opportunities so that we are right now in the process of developing that plan for the implementation grants. The state of Hawaii just put out an RFP. Anybody that's interested in that needs to act now. The submissions are due January 5th. And then depending on how that submission is reviewed, it would or would not get onto the state's priority climate action plan. So that is, yeah, I have to clarify that. Then the other thing is, for a number of years, folks who are really trying to reform composting regulations have been putting forth this idea. We called it artisan scale composting. And yeah, there's a lot of reform that needs to be done at a lot of levels, but why can't we just all come together and say, hey, if you have this very low level of volume of materials that you're moving, that you're just exempt from Department of Health regulations. And this is something that we see in most, if not all of the states in the United States, that they have this very low tier. I myself am going to confess, I break the law every other week because I go to events. And our organization works to help people stage zero waste events, which for the most part has to do with collecting food and truly compostable serviceware. I take that stuff, I bring it to my house, I compost it in my backyard, and I put it on my landscape. I do this all the time. If the state could just get behind this, it would be extremely helpful, not only in terms of events, which happen all the time on the island in conjunction with the tourism industry, but I can't tell you the number of people, visitors who come up to me at these events And they're absolutely shocked that the state is not doing more around this, that they come here from Norway or someplace and they think we're going to be into, diverting organics, and we don't do anything. So that kind of reform at that low level to say, hey, if you have the small volume of materials and you're using the right kind of compostable products, and we use air carbon, which is made from PHB, not PHL. It's beautiful stuff. It works really, really well, that you should just be able to do it. And then on the county side, if the counties would say, hey, or even the state, if you're going to take any grants and aid funding for your event, you need to stage your event as zero waste. Hawaii Tourism Authority should be doing the same thing. Merry Monarch, all of these events should be zero waste. And that's not to say that that's the end of the line solution, but to have truly compostable materials, to collect them at events, to get that stuff out of the landfill and into our soils is going to be a huge improvement. This is a really simple thing that Department of Health could get behind, and we could accomplish working with the counties.
Thanks, Christine. Now, we've allocated ourselves a good portion of time here in the agenda to have a dialogue and conversation. So we encourage our task force members to take this opportunity to build upon the presentation.
Can I answer some of those questions as a DOH representative, I guess? I mean, I am speaking as a DOH employee. In regards to food waste, I think our big issues regarding that are nuisance issues regarding odor, dust control, and it's based on experience. In the past, there was even before I was here, there was a large operation out in Waimanalo that did food waste. And it essentially got shut down because they couldn't control their odor issues. It became a huge public nuisance, constant complaints from the public about the smell. The facility kept trying to control the odor issues, but was just not able to in the end, and they finally shut down because of that. And it's not because we weren't trying to work with them to work on those issues. There was just too much public backlash regarding that. And so that was a larger facility. But recently there's also been another small composter that, based on the way that they composted their materials, was not regulated by us per se. And that facility, basically a smaller facility, had dust control issues. And it's basically with their final compost, the dust was getting into neighbors' yards, and there were complaints from them regarding that, and they finally shut down because of that, some of their operations. So in regards to food waste, that's always a concern, and so we are, at least from the Department of Health, are loath to exempt it because it's based on basically on the operator and how they're doing things. If you're responsible, then no issues, right? But if we have irresponsible people out there, or people who are trying to cut corners, or who feel like, oh, well, I'm composting, and so you should just put up with whatever, my nuisances are as my neighbors, then there's going to be issues around that. And the next part in regards to compostables, the PFAS issue keeps coming up. There's just too many unknowns around PFAS right now. Not enough information is out there regarding that. We are learning more and more, and we have a study, as Mike said earlier, that the HERE office is going through right now to look at PFAS, certain types of PFAS. But even while they're going through that, we're learning that there are more and more different types of PFAS materials out there. I think the EPA had promulgated some regulations that address some of the PFAS, But there were hundreds of compounds out there. And I think one of the things we learned recently was that what the industry did was they had a certain type of compound with a certain branch of attached to it. And all they did was strip that branch off, put a different type of branch, and now you don't, when you test, it doesn't, that PFAS doesn't show up. But if you strip that branch off and then test for it, then it becomes, then you can see, oh yeah, this is how much PFAS is in this thing. And so all of that is just, it's new information. I mean, I think nationwide, they're trying to figure all of that out. So even for us, at this point, looking at compostables, we actually went to BPI and we asked them, how are you guys determining whether something is PFAS free or not? And they gave us an answer, and we delved a little bit deeper, and we said, well, how are you making this decision? At some point, they said, well, this is, a trade secret for them. And so they weren't going to divulge any of that information to us. So we couldn't verify whether their material was PFAS free. And so we're relying on that information to make a good decision as to whether a compostable product can be composted and then placed next to materials that, next to plants that could be food sources and things like that. And so that's where we stand on it. I feel like until we learn more or get more information, it's hard for us to say, okay, go ahead and compost this stuff and then feed it to people, so.
Thank you, Glenn. Other members, continue the conversation, please, as well as our guests. Mike?
As a informational question, what is the scale of composting before a permit is needed? I was under the impression that small scale was already exempt, like backyard, community gardens, schools. At some point, I remember a bill talking about artisan composting, and I don't remember the details, but just throwing that out there for information.
I guess that question. So I'm not 100% familiar with what the requirements are for compost exemptions, but in general, household composting is exempt. And also, any agricultural, any farmers who compost and only compost their agricultural waste on their facility are also exempt from composting. Anytime in general waste is coming from another site, from off-site onto a site to be composted, that location needs to be permitted.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Christine.
It's not just the volume, it's if you move it from one site to another, and that's the problem. If you're moving a very small volume of materials from one site to another, like for instance, an event where it's generated to a farm, then that should be permissible.
I mean, everything, again, as long as it's responsible, then we don't have any issues with it. I think maybe in terms of farmers being able to compost on their facilities, I think the location is a big thing. If they're an ag land and they're composting, it's zoned for that activity to some extent, I'm guessing. And it's away from residential areas, and so that's allowed. So if that's the limitation for it, that's fine. Again, with a lot of the compost that's not compostable serviceware, it's the nuisances that become issues.
Thank you, Glenn. Andy, I see your hand.
Yes, thank you. I would think that in terms of, the small scale, that it would partially hinge on whether those wastes are putrescible or not. So, you know, even if at an event where you're collecting, you know, post-consumer food where you have meats, cheeses, oils, things that are putrescible waste, that I would think would kick in some form of regulation. But I'll leave that to DOH to answer that.
Thank you.
Sure. I guess, yeah. I mean, you know, if the legislature tells us that they want something exempted, I mean, we abide by whatever the law is. But like I said, in general, our issues in the past have been those nuisance issues, and so putrescibles definitely have been the issues in the past. And again, this is based on experience, not based on, you know, us just wanting to regulate them essentially.
Mm-hmm. Contamination. Thank you, Sean.
Yeah, I just want to say I agree with Christine, and I hear what the Department of Health is saying as well. And I think that what's needed is some kind of just regulation, you know, plan, some type of, something that mimics maybe like the same of like the cottage food laws versus, you know, certified kitchens, where just some sort of easy application for folks that want to do small scale composting, some path they can follow where they get some kind of certification saying they're allowed to, and that would give maybe some security to the Department of Health, where if complaints do come in, then there's like a tracking and there's a way to, you know, deal with those complaints, et cetera. But some sort of, and maybe this needs to come from legislation, some sort of path that folks that want to do small scale composting, bringing materials from off-site, like events or whatever, can follow that and then be in accordance with the law.
Thank you, Sean. Once again, the floor remains open for our task force members to contribute to this conversation, ask additional questions, or to clarify what has been already known. Come on.
I think Glenn also touched on a very important point about competing land uses. I'm no land use expert, but it feels as if important agricultural lands or IALs are being developed into things like single family homes, like Ho'opili and the Ewa Plains, or solar farms. And we really, at a government level, we really should put more support for the farmers, because as Christine touched on, they're a very important stakeholder as being an outlet for this food waste. And they have the ability to create compost, mulch, and animal feed from that. So one of the recommendations could be to keep IALs in reserve for the farmers, as was originally intended.
Thank you. Christine, I see your hand.
So my understanding is Hawaii is one of only 2 places in the United States. The other place might be Puerto Rico, that does not allow for this exemption of a low volume of materials being able to be moved, you know, from the site where it's generated to be composted or processed someplace else. And then the idea is, well, you know, it's Hawaii and Puerto Rico because those are tropical climates or whatever, but actually in Guam, they do exactly this. So it's working in other places. And I think the thing that would be helpful is not to have this approach where we have these regulations and if you do the wrong thing, you get busted, but that the state, you know, either through Department of Health or maybe through CTAR, the university or whatever, has, you know, a team of consultants or field experts that can go out. So if you wanted to do this, what I'm talking about, you would register with the state, and then you would be part of a program where these people would come out and visit your site occasionally and check it out and see what you're doing. You know, when we did this program with Build Back Better in the county, we actually composted cardboard and shredded box board. We did laboratory studies that was shown that there were no contaminants from either of those practices. There is so much work going on in the informal sector outside of the state agencies and university system is really valuable and indicates that we should be a lot less conservative or restrictive in terms of how these materials get moved around. And I'm not sure what we can do to use those experiences to reform composting and regulations and make organic diversion better, but we need to do it. And so having that lowest tier, having it be exempt, having people register, having a team of people who go out and check regularly and uplift the capacity throughout the state for people to manage these materials would be a really beautiful thing. It's the kind of thing that EPA wants to fund. And I know this is all about an eventual plan, but I'm not going to waste the opportunity when Department of Health is sitting here and we're talking about this to raise these issues.
Thank you, Christine.
I'd like to add that in terms of facilities, not necessarily the transportation, there is a three-part test. That three-part test includes whether it's protrusible. That's the first question, and the answer is yes. The next question, or the next part of the test, is contamination, and then the third one, I think, is residual. So facilities that manage food waste or even green waste need to be permitted. In terms of the type of permit, in California, we have tiers for permitting. The lowest tier being notification. Well, let me start a step back. There is actually a pilot tier. With this pilot tier, it's even easier than a notification tier. It allows you for 2 years of piloting an approach with minimal regulatory requirements, even no environmental review. So it prevents you from doing that and allows you to start a project, see what happens. Then we have a notification tier for volume, and these tiers are really associated to volumes of material being processed. So we have the notification tier, then after that we have a registration tier, and then a full solid waste facility permit. And then there are guidelines for the various types of operations you're conducting, whether it be a traditional open windrow, cover-aided static piles, or in-vessel digestion. There are various tiers for every type, for the various types of approaches as well. For this study, or for this evaluation conducted to date, we did look at the solid waste facility permitting structure in Hawaii, but did not dive deep into that. But now that I'm hearing as part of this task force meeting that it is very important, we will definitely take a deeper dive into that. And once we come back with our follow-up in our next meeting, we will have more information on permitting and what we are seeing in the permitting structure for Hawaii.
Thank you, Cesar. Oh, Christine, are you responding, or is that from a previous ask? Go ahead.
Nope, that's before I forgot.
Okay, no problem. And inviting our members from the public who have joined us, if you have something you'd like to offer, you weren't able to previously, and this conversation has stimulated a thought, please feel free to share that with us at this time. Task force members, once again, contributions to the discussion, expanding the views would be helpful. Marvin.
Yeah, thank you. You know, what I'm hearing here is, you know, on one hand, everyone on this call and in the community has the passion to recycle. They have the passion to even take it further to divert food waste from our landfills or incinerator. But on the other hand, there's the environmental mitigation factors that the Department of Health and regulators have to be cautious about. And everyone needs to do their job, basically, right? And it's hard to provide a a limit of what is permissible and what is not, or permitted, required, etc. You know, I'll just take a step back for us. You know, not only being a large composting facility, but also being permitted for biosolids, as well as animal manure. And you add that into with food waste, you know, who's to say that, you know, compost number one cannot start composting animal manure or biosolids to a small quantity. And for what we had to go through is by putting in going through a full-blown environmental impact statement for our composting facility, as well as having a Department of Planning for the city's special use permits or conditional use permits. That all had to be obtained, even though we were on ag land, and even though you know, the recycling part and diversion part made sense. So the due diligence, I think, is necessary again to mitigate environmental concerns, and not just the environment, but people, community, and I know Lane didn't mention this as well, but just last year, in fact, maybe even earlier part of this year, there was a school on the windward side that was composting food waste, and they got shut down because of the community outcry on odor and vector and whatnot. And so we just need to be mindful and trying to understand what is that tolerance level, and with backyard composting. And I think the Department of Health has in their requirements, anything above 1 yard is considered as solid waste. And again, not just looking at ourselves per se, but 10 or 20,000 more members out there that would like to do this. And how do we manage it? How do we regulate it? Because it can really go out of control at the same time. Thank you.
I'd like to add to that is very true. We are discussing diversion here from disposal, and that would require the development of new infrastructure. As that begins to occur, we must make sure that development is considering the environment, protecting the environment. So that's reason why these tiers are necessary. In California, they went a step further and did a general water discharge requirements for composting facility, WDRs. So any new composting facility being developed has to comply with those general WDRs and provide a technical report for the development of such site. So there are multiple permitting or entitlement phases, starting with land use, typically conditional use permit, environmental impact review or reporting, whether at the state or federal level, permitting at the state with Department of Health, permitting with State Resources Water Control Board, and permitting also with air resources agencies. The last thing is, for assisting in all this, obviously the state of California has developed documentation for the water protection and air, but also assisted in developing that supplemental EIR to be a step for anybody developing these types of facilities, that they won't have to start from the beginning. And this was specifically for anaerobic digesters. So we do have to protect the environment and protect it as we see this new development of facilities to manage compost. We must protect the environment and manage that. So totally agree with the discussion of permitting.
Great, thank you. See, we have someone else?
Rafael.
Oh, Rafael?
Well, again, everybody. Yeah, I had a few different comments just through listening to the conversation that I wanted to get down. And first, I just wanted to emphasize that truly believing in the value of a decentralized compost system. From studying this from around the country, around the world, the issue of contamination really accelerates when we have centralized systems. And to piggyback on what Christina's talked about, emissions from transport, decentralized systems can really help with that too. I know I tried to caution the city and county in Honolulu on this and how they're putting forth this new law for the city, and also to learn from what places like California has done. And this is anecdotal, but from what I understand, like places like San Francisco that have had this in place for years now through Ecology, the product that is being created and being essentially given to Mendocino County farmers, as I understand it, is not good compost. In fact, they don't want it. It's filled with plastic. It's not nutrient rich. And I think that those issues continue to come up over and over and over again when we have centralized systems, and we're not addressing those. We're trying to do big slapping on solutions to try and fix it, but we're not addressing the nuance of what actually comes up with waste systems. And so I think things like in-vessel systems, and I don't think that's the only way to do this, are really important. They can go in schools, they could go with hotels, they could go in public parks, they could go in community gardens, and because they're contained and mitigate many of the issues of odors, of pests. I also believe, and we're talking about this permitting issue coming up, that there has to be at least some form of tiers for the different styles of composting. If people who are doing small scale composting that is responsible and contained should not be going through the same 200-page permit as somebody who has a mega operation. And I think that we can talk about the necessity for regulating compost, because it can be dangerous, it can have odors, it can cause issues, but there has to be some accessibility to people who are doing levels of it and allowing them to prove that it can be done. And hopefully, like the container that's at Full Circle Farm shows that those contained issues can be. And then lastly, I just wanted to add something that I think would be really important for Hawaii when we're talking about things like PFAS and just soil health in general. There, as I understand it, are no testing facilities in Hawaii. I think this is something that the state could really take on to have localized testings for soil health, for chemicals that are being put into it. Shipping soil tests off island. From the last conversation I had with Department of Health, like PFAS testing is backed up six to 8 months in other places. And why aren't we investing resources to have testing that both farmers can do for their soils that they have here, and the people who are actually doing composting operations to continue the testing process and make the feedback loop quicker. Yeah, that's all for now, but thanks everybody.
Thank you, Rafael.
I guess to answer some of your issues, especially with regard to permitting, we're already working on an application form to address certain types of composting, specifically in-vessel, because it does address a lot of the mitigation aspects. I don't think that it's a different type of permit. It's a different type of application form that's a little bit, our general application form has to address every type of facility. And so we have to have all the questions in there that could apply to a large operation like Hawaiian Earth versus a small operation. But I think what we're doing is we're making it more tailored to the smaller operations. You'll still provide the essential information and you'll still be permitted. And even when we write the permits, they're not the same. Just because a facility is bigger or smaller, we wouldn't write a long permit for that. We would just write a shorter permit for the smaller operation. And it's not necessarily that the operation is smaller too all the time. It kind of depends in this case on the types of feedstock that you're accepting. So the more types of feedstock, kind of what Marvin alluded to with, if you're accepting food waste, if you're accepting biosolids, if you're accepting manures, each of those feedstocks have issues that need to be addressed. So we have to address it somehow in the permit. And that's kind of what adds on to the permit. So we are working on something very basic. So looking at food waste with in an in-vessel system, and the essential information that we need for that to permit that. I think that's what we're looking at. If there's any other types of facilities that people are interested in, we'd be open to it, and we'll potentially work on those in the future for permitting to try to address some of that. But yeah, as far as we know, that's the type of facility that I think people are most looking towards. Like I said, we're not including compostable serviceware at this time, just because of the issues surrounding that. And yeah, all I can say and keep saying is that there's not enough information out there for us to address it properly. And so if anyone wants to compost serviceware, we are asking them to provide that information, however we provide it. Whether you're going to perform a study or try to find an already developed study to address a lot of those issues, that's what we're doing. Or limiting the type of material that you're accepting, where it's coming from, how are you ensuring it's PFAS free, that type of thing.
Great. Thank you very much. Andy, I see your hands up, and then we'll take Raphael.
All right, thank you. Just a question regarding vermicomposting. At some point, I'd like to see vermicomposting maybe see a rise on within the islands. I was curious how the state would regulate that type of a facility. Primarily, you'd only be doing pre-consumer food waste because the worms aren't really doing meats and the putrescible waste. But some states manage them as a solid waste, and some states manage it as an ag, and so that's a much lower regulatory issue. So I was just curious how the state would view, like a scalable worm farm.
The way we regulate it is if that facility is accepting solid waste from off-site, they would need our permit to do it. So we would need to, if it was a vermicomposting operation, we would need to permit that facility under a solid waste management permit. Yeah, with that said, again, if that's something that, the community wants to see a lot of, essentially, we could put together a special application form for that to address the specific requirements, or at least the specific information we would need for those types of facilities. I do know that, I guess we would limit the type of feedstock, like you said too, because I assume with vermicomposting, I don't know enough about it as to whether the pathogen reduction issue might become a concern with that type of material.
Well, that's going to be dependent on the feedstock you use. So it's generally pathogens are not an issue with worm farms unless you're actually trying to manage those types of materials. Like there are some places that manage biosolids using worms, and that has had some success in reducing pathogens. But I don't know if that, biosolids creates this whole other issue, with heavy metals, pharmaceuticals, we test wastewater for COVID. So, what the heck is in biosolids is kind of a Pandora's box. I didn't even want to broach the topic, actually, but it is a concern. So,
yeah, and I do know that in general for vermicomposting, it's a lot of vegetative materials, not too much fats, oils, proteins that go into it. Although I have, I looked into it briefly myself. I used to vermicompost myself at home, and the recommendation was, don't put any meats in there. So when I started this job, I remember someone saying, oh yeah, worms can't compost proteins. But I think I looked it up and I saw an article where you could potentially put proteins with the worms and they'll process it.
Yeah, they can. It's just it's a degree of how much and what size type of facility you're running. The larger facilities, a lot of places I've gone to and checked out worm farms where they're actually taking finished compost and feeding it to the worms that have, composted, post and pre and post consumer food waste. And then they use that compost as a feedstock for the worms. And, the worms don't work on a different thing. They're mesophilic. They're not doing any hot composting. So the microbes in there are great for the soil. They're the microbes that make the nutrients available to plants. So, I mean, it's a whole other type of system that's super beneficial to poor soils.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if anybody wants to start an operation, even a small one, we'd be open to discussing with them. I mean, we'd be breaking new ground to some extent, so learning for us too would be important. And again, addressing the issues of nuisance would be a concern, the big concern there.
Thank you.
I like to add that in terms of vermicomposting, it doesn't necessarily have to be a farm or a centralized location. The city of LA has implemented vermicomposting in the form of, instead of providing a backyard composting container, there's an ability from the city of LA, if you're a resident, to acquire a container that is scalable. It's basically a box, and you start basically putting trays in. As you grow, you could scale it and do it in your home. According to many people that I know are using it, it doesn't create any odor. There's a lot of benefits from the soil that is generated, and also the liquid that has a name, but I can't remember what they call it, the juice.
Yeah, you don't want to necessarily use the leachate, but it's a vermicompost teas that you can make from, you take the castings and then you aerate and add like something that's going to blow up the population of microbes, and you want to use that within 24 hours, and you add microbes, and I mean it has fungal properties that can reduce fungus on plants and roots. So it has a lot of benefits. I mean, it's more than we can go into probably with the time remaining here.
Yeah. So just the last thing is that, this has been a alternative to the backyard composting container. It could be a vermi composting container, especially for multifamily dwellings.
The only other issue is you're not allowed to import worms into the state, so you'd have to find a local source.
There are guys on Craigslist that sell it. That's where I got mine.
Okay. With time in mind, we have about 10 minutes, so we're going to take up Raphael. I think you have a comment or question, and then we'll go to Christina.
Awesome. Thanks again, everybody. I just had a couple quick follow-ups. First on contamination issues, I'm just curious if the state has considered a much more aggressive kind of like fines on people and what they put in the bins. I've seen what Marvin has to deal with, and it's not, and it's something that while I believe that like carrots are really nice, unless you're giving somebody a real big carrot, they're not responding to 5-10 cents things when it comes to whether they're putting plastic bags into their green bins. And so I'm wondering how much effort is being put into thinking about collectors, categorizing who is at fault for doing some of that and starting to levy fines. That would be one question. The other question, I'm just curious, on the PFAS discussion and compostable containers, and I just want to add the caveat that I don't think that compostable containers are the solution to anything. Single use is still a major problem, and if you're making something and using it once and throwing it away, that's kind of the definition of insanity and a disrespect for resources in general, whether it be fossil fuel or sugarcane or corn, whatever it is. That's not the solution. We have to change our value systems in that. But I am curious with the actual items that do exist. I also live in a real world and know that they're not going away yet. But as I understand it, like PLA cups have no PFAS in them, and most of the PFAS concerns are in clamshells and other things like that, where it's the water barrier. Has DOH exempted for composting things like PLA that are known not to have PFAS in them? Yeah. Thanks.
We haven't exempted anything as far as I know. I'm not familiar enough, again, I'm not the composting person, I'm just only from what I know. But anything that's PFAS-free, that can be shown to be PFAS-free, we could definitely include it as a feedstock in any composting operation.
Thank you. Christina?
Products made with PHB are PFAS free, and they're incredible. And I just want to leave everybody with this vision. Okay, we're going to put our heads together. We're going to pool resources. We're going to create this system. It's not about regulating and permitting. It's about register with the state. It's about Department of Ag and Department of Health providing the backup and the support that farmers and passionate composters like myself need to be successful. And we're just going to make this amazing system that everybody around the world can look at and say, wow, these people figured it out.
It's great, thank you.
I don't see anybody else.
Do you see anybody else? Well, thank you for the conversation and discussion. What we'd like to do is take the opportunity to gather all those we've documented for further review. And at this time, let's look at our summary for today's meeting.
Thank you, Ramsey. So some of the challenges, oh yeah, next slide.
Next slide, please.
So some of the challenges that we have discussed so far are issues with odors and vectors associated with organics management, illegal dumping, spread of invasive species, fire risks, contamination, PFAS, stormwater and leachate impacts, compostable packaging, and funding for infrastructure or programs. And in regards to potential solutions brought up today, we've discussed the need to support and enhance accessibility for food producers and farmers. We also talked about the extension and development of existing and new community composting programs to collect food scraps from residents and commercial businesses. We've discussed partnerships with organizations to expand and develop these programs. So for example, grocery stores and restaurants collaborating with composters, as well as partnerships through DOH with universities, teams of consultants and field experts to increase capacity. We've also discussed policy, regulation, and research for compostable packaging, as well as a network of electric vehicles for organics curbside collection. We've also discussed enhancement of education and outreach to minimize food disposal. So for example, providing resources on shopping lists or proper food storage, as well as providing education on best buy dates, as well as providing broader outreach and education regarding compostable packaging and contamination. We've also talked about creating incentives for food scraps management, similar to the High Five program, as well as partnership with Kiss the Ground to provide educational resources to Hawaii residents, such as the Common Grounds video. We've discussed creating an ordinance requiring businesses to recycle food scraps, as well as funding to support infrastructure for food storage and pickup. Compost facility exemptions for facilities that receive low tonnages was another discussion point that was brought up, as well as zero waste events. And through legislation, creating an easy pathway for small scale composting was another topic that someone brought up, as well as the development for organics processing infrastructure while taking environmental factors into consideration. There was also some discussion on modifying the current permitting structure to introduce permitting tiers, as well as investment in resources for localized testing of soil. We also discussed the promotion of vermicomposting in the state of Hawaii, similar to City of Los Angeles's vermicomposting program. We also discussed consider issuing fines for those who contaminate. We also discussed behavioral change and the need to stay away from single-use utensils, as well as composting operations registration with the state and enhanced support from Department of Agriculture to composters. So if there's anything I might have missed or something that anyone else wants to add, please feel free.
The topic of PFAS was also significant in this discussion as we are discussing organics management and processing facilities. So.
Yeah, thank you. Christina, I saw your hand popped up. Was there something you wanted to add or clarify in the summary?
No, sorry, that was just a legacy hand.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
We will use the meeting recording and the chat log to make our notes in addition to the verbal summary that was just presented.
Thanks, Katie. Anything else? Okay, great. We're going to move on then to our next steps and action items, which includes determining when our next meeting will be and discussion of potential solutions.
So regarding next steps, Katie mentioned we'll be compiling information received today for consideration in the Integrated Solid Waste Management Plan update. And similar to what has occurred at our last task force meeting, as well as today's meeting, we'll be summarizing and wrapping up our discussion on organics at our next task force meeting, which will focus on CMD debris management. And this meeting is scheduled for January 25th of 2024.
Next slide, please. Okay.
So we wanted to open the discussion once again for any last minute questions or even comments that anyone wants to share with us.
I'm not seeing any hands currently.
Okay.
Feel free to drop it in the chat if you do have any last minute thoughts.
Or questions.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for your participation. This was a lot of great information that we will be taking and will be eventually implemented into the Integrated Solid Waste Management Plan update. So thank you.
Excellent. Want to see if any other comments, thoughts, questions?
Yeah, that was the last slide.
Thanks, everyone. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas.
Yes, happy holidays. Oh, I do
Yeah,
see
good to see
Christine's
all of you.
hand popped up.
Thank you, everyone.
Andrew? Andy?
Yeah, thanks for everybody. Do you have an email list of all the participants in case I wanted to contact some of the folks within the group? Not to talk about this stuff, but just in terms of like furthering conversation on other topics.
Yeah, Andrew, if you're talking about task force members, we do have emails. But if you are referencing furthering a discussion on a topic that is on our list, that would be a permitted interaction group or something we would need to discuss and make sure that falls in line with Sunshine Law.
Understood.
But yes, if
Thank
you
you.
are interested, please feel free to reach out to Lane or Katie or I.
All right.
Thank you
Appreciate
so
it.
much.
Thank you again, everyone. Until next, do you have anything?
Yeah, I'll just add my thank you to everyone. Our new in-person attendees.
Yes.
And I know we've had some new people online also. Yeah, I think we had some really good discussion today. I know I learned a bunch of things. My brain feels full. And, just judging by, just observing as discussion went on, nod to the head. I think others have gained a little bit of insight also. So, yeah, just thank you, everybody. And yeah, happy holidays.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy holidays, be safe, and we'll see you in January.
Thank you.
And to our team, thanks for doing what you continue to do.
Thank you. Thank you.
How long?
Yes, thank you, Marvin. Thank you guys for participating.
Thank you all.
Thanks for having us.
Aloha and ho ho ho.